morning all of Calder Bluff came up the Cinder Ground with empty buckets in their hands. They came hats off. To a man they had laughed out of the auction yard 4 months before. Their wells had stood dry 3 weeks. His had not. 4 months earlier, Cyrus Redfield had stood over 80 half-dead hogs no one would bid a copper on, and called out to a yard of grinning men that here was a fine start to a herd for anyone fool enough to want one. A widower named Josiah Weller, 51, with $7 to his name past the 25 he was about to spend, lifted his hand. 25 for the lot, Redfield crowed. A man alone, at his age, a boy to raise, and not an acre worth the plow. God keep his pantry. The whole yard laughed. To understand the laugh, you have to know what $25 was in the drought spring of 1934. About $600 in today's money. And to a widower with a boy to raise, the whole difference between a winter survived and a winter that finished him. He had just handed over nearly all of it for 80 animals not worth their own hides. What those 80 starving hogs rooted up under the one patch of ground nobody in the county would take for free, that is the whole of this story. It begins with a joke a town told at a man's expense. Stay with him, because the ground Calder Bluff had written off, and the man written off with it, were about to be worth more than every deed in the county. The spring of 1934 came in dry, and it came in mean. 3 seasons of failed rain had bled the hill country white, and the bank had taken the Harlow farm the way it took everything now, quietly, on paper. What was left stood in the yard to be sold. Cyrus Redfield ran the auction from the bed of a wagon, a big, soft man in the only clean coat for 6 miles. His warmth was a tool, the kind a card sharp uses to make a man forget his money. He did not farm. He bought what desperate men were forced to sell, one bad year at a time. He sold the plow team and the milk cow, then the hogs. 80 of them stood penned along the far rail, rendered by winter to hide and frame. A hog ought to be round. These were all angles. Redfield spread his hands over the pen. 80 head of good stock. Thin, granted, but 80. No one raised a hand. Every man there knew the sum. To carry a hog that lean onto grass took near a barrel of grain a head, and this spring there was none to spare. The pen did not hold 80 hogs. It held 80 debts. Come now, any offer at all? The warmth had gone thin into something with teeth behind it. $1, 50 cents, or I turn them out on the road and let the county starve them for free. At the back of the yard, a man stood with a boy pressed to his hip. Josiah Weller was lean, the way the hogs were lean, his coat pale at the seams. He had said nothing all morning, only watched the pen the way a man reads a page, the ones down in the muck, the 2 or 3 still holding their heads up. Beside him the boy, Micah, 7 and small for it, had a fistful of his father's sleeve and would not let go. 25, Josiah said. It was not loud. It carried anyway. Redfield turned to the crowd. Sold, gentlemen, to the man least able to afford them. He shook his head with a tenderness worse than a sneer. A widower, alone at his age, a boy to raise, and a dead wife's ground that won't grow a weed. God keep his pantry. The yard laughed, and the laugh went on longer than it needed to. Josiah did not answer. He counted the money into Redfield's soft palm. Coins and 2 worn bills, $25 that were near all he had in the world. It was a winter of flour. It was shoes for the boy against the first snow, or seed enough to try the bottomland one more year. It was a month's wages for a man lucky enough to have work, and Josiah had not had steady work in 2 years. He counted it out to the last dime and did not look up at the laughing. The boy watched his father's hands, then the hogs, and did not laugh. It was 6 miles to the ground Josiah Weller owned, and most of a day to walk 80 failing hogs there without breaking them. By the time the light went orange, they came up onto the 15 acres that were the only thing in the world truly theirs. Folks called it the Cinder Ground and did not mean it kindly. 15 acres of rust-red hardpan clay across the ridge. Nothing worth eating grew there. There was no well, only a cracked stone cistern that would not hold rain. Nobody would take that ground for free. Josiah had it because he had bought the deed for a pittance at a tax sale years back, and a man has to stand somewhere. He built a fire and fed his son first. Beside the cistern, on a nail, hung a tin dipper. It had been Naomi's, bought their first year with egg money. Now it hung over a cistern with nothing to dip. 3 years she had been gone, dead of a fever in the second dry summer, one a doctor might have turned had there been money to send for him. The dying land had already taken the money and every soft thing between them, so when the fever came there was nothing left to spend. Micah had been 4. He was 7 now. The same slow season that emptied that cistern had taken the boy's mother. The ground had never once stopped asking to be paid. Josiah sat over the coals with the cornmeal sack open beside him and could see the bottom of it. 80 mouths. Every way he turned it, the sum came out the same and said he was finished. But he had spent his life among animals and knew what men who trust ledgers never learn, that what a page cannot count is often the thing that saves a man. He made himself a promise to carry these 80 as far as a man could carry anything, and see. Out in the pen, one hog got up, lifted its snout into the night wind, reading something a man could not smell, then faced the far corner of the cinder ground, the reddest and deadest, and looked a while before lying back down. It eased him, and he could not have said why. Worth, he thought, was like water. It did not sit on the surface where a man could price it, but ran deep underground until something patient enough rooted it up. 80 mouths, and a sack he could see the bottom of. The figures said he was finished. He had never much trusted arithmetic. He banked the coals and lay down beside his son, and before sleep he bowed his head and thanked God for 80 mouths he had no way to fill, the way his father had taught him, that a man gives his truest thanks when the table is barest, for only then does the thanks cost him anything. There was no feeding 80 hogs from an empty sack, so Josiah got it out of the country itself. Each morning before light he took a spade to the low margins where the creek still held life. Cattail root, slippery elm bark, acorns by the hatful, and boiled it into a thin gray slurry no man would eat and 80 hungry hogs would fight over. He did not ask the town, and the town offered nothing. A dry year strips the charity out of people, and Calder Bluff was hungry itself. The same drought thinning his hogs was thinning their tables, and a family watching its own children eat less does not carry its leavings up a ridge to a fool's pigs. What they had for him was talk. So he turned to the animals. Josiah Weller could read a herd, had drovered stock the length of his young years, and learned to see 50 animals moving as one at a time, which was off its feet a day before it showed, which one the others drifted toward. It was not luck. It was a skill, the way a smith's eye for heat is a skill. Within a week, he knew which of the 80 were failing, moved them to the near pen, and lost fewer than a harder man would. He knew already that no man carries 80 hogs through a winter on 15 acres of rust. Come fall, he would sell most, slaughter some, and keep back a small breeding few. But that was fall. The hogs earned their keep. Turned out on the dead ground, they rooted, driving their snouts through the red hardpan and breaking the crust nothing had grown through in years. He ran a wire to keep them off the garden by the cistern, for a hog will take a garden to the ground given the chance. Everywhere else he let them go, and they cleared the cinder ground a snout at a time. In the evenings, Micah stood on the rail beside him, and Josiah taught him. "Which one's sick?" he would say, and wait. The boy looked a long while. "The spotted one. She's letting the others push in ahead of her." Josiah nodded once, and that was praise enough. He was teaching his son to mind what other men walk past, that a herd, like a town, tells its truth to whoever stands still long enough to hear it. And out at the far red corner of the ground, the hogs kept going back to one worthless spot, day after day, as though they knew a thing the whole county did not. Ephraim Locke had dug wells in that hill country for 40 years, and he was the only man in Calder Bluff who did not laugh at Josiah Weller. He came up the Cinder Ground one gray afternoon with a forked branch of witch hazel under his arm, found Josiah at the fence watching the herd, and leaned on the rail without a word. "They root like they're hunting something," he said at last. "They are. They just haven't told me what. A hog will walk right to water a witching rod would step over. A pig doesn't guess. A pig smells it." Ephraim tapped the rail. "There is stone under this ridge. Limestone. Deep. Older than anybody's memory of this place. And where there's that kind of stone, there is water that owes nothing to the sky." "Every well I know draws from rain," Josiah said. "The shallow ones do. And they die first when the sky shuts." The old man looked along the dry ridgeline as though he could see clear through it. "But some water traveled a long time before it finds you. It fell somewhere high and far off, went down into the rock, and it has been coming ever since, cold the whole way. That water was rain before your grandfather drew breath. A dry sky cannot reach down to where it lives. The ground keeps its own counsel." Ephraim pushed off the rail, slow, favoring one hip. "Won't be hurried, and it won't be owned. Not by me, not by you, not by any man with a deed and a loud voice. It gives what it gives, when it's ready, to whoever happens to be standing over it." He watched the broad, torn-eared sow root at the damp seam, and something dry crossed his face. "Though in 40 years I never once saw a pig ask a man's permission." He left the witch hazel propped against the post, uncut, as if the ground had already made his tools look foolish. Josiah did not understand him yet. The hogs already did. Before the ground gives up what it had kept all those years, before the first cold water ever breaks the clay. Tell us in the comments tonight, what patch of the world are you listening from, and has the sky been kind to it lately? These stories travel farther than Josiah's hogs ever wandered. The hogs would not leave the high ground alone. It was the worst patch on the 15 acres, rust-red hardpan near the ridge where nothing had grown in living memory. Josiah had pinned the herd lower, on the softer bottom, and by the second morning they had broken the wire and climbed back to it. He mended the fence. They broke it again, not scattered, but every animal moving the same way, the way a river knows which way is downhill. He stopped fixing it and watched. They had worked one spot down to a shallow bowl, a damp stain no wider than a wagon wheel. A pig, Ephraim had said, does not guess. Water red on the air to their snouts the way wood smoke reads to a person, and the whole herd had smelled it and made up its mind. Then, on the third morning, they stopped rooting. Josiah came up the rise with Micah trailing behind and found the animals standing still. 80 hogs ringed around the damp bowl, snouts lowered, shoulder to shoulder in a rough circle, and quiet the way hogs almost never are. Micah slid a small hand into the tail of his father's coat. "They're not digging anymore, Papa," he said, working it out the way children do. "They're waiting for you to come." Josiah stood very still. Then he went for the spade. He stepped into the ring, and the hogs made room and did not scatter. The first spadeful came up heavy and cold, the second wetter, the third darkening at the walls. He dug the way a man digs who has decided to believe a thing, past the point where his own good sense would have quit. The fourth spadeful, and the fifth. The fifth broke through. The clay gave all at once, and water came up into the hole, clear and cold and rising, filling the cut faster than he had opened it. Not a trickle, not a stain. Water cold enough to ache in the wrist, out of ground that had not raised a blade of grass in 20 years. He did not shout. He knelt in the wet clay, put his hand into the water, and held it there until his fingers went numb. Micah crept to the rim.
Is it good, Papa?
Josiah did not answer with words. He went down to the house and came back with Naomi's tin dipper, the one that had hung 3 years by the cracked cistern, dry. He filled it, cold and clean over the dented rim, and held it out to his son first. Micah drank. Cold ran down his chin and he laughed, startled, and drank again. He had spent his last money on 80 animals to keep himself from going under. It had not once crossed his mind that they might be the ones keeping him. Water that runs free does not stay clean on its own, and Josiah knew it. He hauled flat stone up from the dry creek bed and set it around the mouth of the spring, careful as a mason, though he had never laid a wall in his life. A stone box sunk into the clay, tight enough to keep the mud out, open enough to let the water spill clean over the lip. It ran as cold at noon as it had the morning it broke. He fenced it, too, not against the thirsty, but against the hogs. A pig fouls good water as gladly as it finds it. Below the spill, the dead ground began to turn. He broke a garden in the wet margin, beans, squash, a short row of corn, and fenced it stout and high, because a hog loose in a garden means a family gone hungry by fall. Green came up out of clay that had raised nothing in his lifetime. He did not keep the 80. A man cannot carry 80 hogs through a hill country winter on 15 acres, and he had counted that before he raised his hand at the auction. Through the summer he let them clear the dead high ground, breaking the hardpan as they went, until land good for nothing began to look like land a man might plow. By fall he sold and slaughtered down to a small breeding few, and the rest paid off debts and filled the smokehouse. He was mending the garden fence one morning when the Odell family came up the road. A mother, 3 thin children, 1 bucket among them, their well gone to mud. Josiah looked at them a while, then nodded toward the spring and bent back to his rail. She filled her bucket twice and did not rightly know how to thank a man who would not look up to be thanked. Micah watched them start back down, heavy-handed with water. "We gave it away," he said, not complaining, turning it over. "It was never ours to keep," Josiah tapped the rail home. "Water is for carrying, Micah. A man fills a bucket, takes it where it's wanted, and then it's gone. That is the whole use of it. Try to keep it, hold it, own it, and it goes bad on you, or it goes dry." The boy thought that over. He did not fully understand it yet. He would. By the time the creeks began to shrink to threads of mud, Josiah Weller had the only cold water for 6 miles, and no notion yet that it was a thing men would come to take from him. The rain that everyone kept promising did not come. It had been promised in June, when the corn was still green enough to lie about, and again in July, when the leaves curled to gray paper and the sky went the flat white of an old dinner plate. By August, Calder Bluff had stopped promising and started counting. The creek went first, shrinking to standing pools and then to a bed of cracked mud. The shallow wells followed. One morning a bucket came up ringing with grit, and within 3 weeks not a working well was left in the low ground. Cattle went down in the fields and did not rise, and their owners learned the particular silence of a pasture where the animals have quit complaining. Redfield's men hauled water in from the county line and sold it by the barrel, the price climbing each day. And on the high ground nobody had wanted, the rust-red 15 acres they had laughed a widower into buying, the cold water came up out of the earth as steadily as ever, as if the drought were a rumor from some other country. Something changed along the low road. A man walking to town with 2 dry buckets would slow at the foot of Josiah's slope and glance up the hill. Quick, the way a man looks at a thing he is ashamed to want. The garden showed green from a mile off now, a single wrong-colored patch in a brown country, and the wrongness of it was water. Josiah let them come and made no speeches about it. When the Odell children climbed up with a milk pail because their mother had a new baby and no well left, he pointed them to the seep and went on mending his fence. When Widow Ansel sent her grandson, he filled the boy's jug himself and said nothing of the auction yard, though the boy's own father had laughed as loud as any man in it. He kept no ledger of who had mocked him. He kept the gate open and his mouth shut, and taught Micah the same, to fill first for whoever stood smallest and thirstiest, and to say nothing that might make a proud man feel the cost of his own thirst. A dry season does not only kill cattle. It shows a town exactly what its neighbors are made of, and the showing had only begun. If you have ever been counted out, called too old, too poor, too alone to matter, and then found that you were the one thing standing between the people who dismissed you and disaster, then this channel was built for you. Hit subscribe. Stay with him. Cyrus Redfield came up the Cinder Ground on a Sunday, on foot, hat against his chest like a man at a funeral. He had left his buggy at the foot of the slope and made the climb slow, so Josiah would watch. "I have come to tell you I was wrong about you," Redfield said, and it was the warmth in it that made Josiah set down his tools. "The whole county had been wrong," he went on. "A man buys what nobody else can see the worth of, and here they all stood, corrected." He would not duck his share of the shame. He had laughed with the rest. Josiah waited. He had learned that the men who opened with an apology were never near done talking. Redfield named his figure, 5 times what Josiah had paid for the 15 acres, cash, enough to buy the best bottomland in the valley twice over. He would develop the water properly, pipe it, box it, manage it for the whole township, so no child in Calder Bluff need be sent up a hill with a pail again. "Not for sale," Josiah said. Redfield smiled, as though the words had been misheard, and explained again, slower, the way a man explains to a slow child. Water like this could not be left in one pair of hands. It wanted organizing, a man who understood contract and the setting of a fair rate, because water given away was water thrown away, and a thing with no price had no master. And there it was, plain beneath the warm words. He did not want the town to have the water. He wanted it to have to come to him for it, to stand at the one door the dry sky had left open and decide who passed through it and what it cost. The warmth went out of him then, all at once, the way heat leaves cooling iron. A man alone could not hold a thing like this, one hillside against a whole parched county. There were laws about water in a crisis and men who wrote them, and the council would sit on Thursday. He fitted his hat back on. A wise man would weigh selling a thing for a fortune against watching it taken for nothing. Josiah picked his tools back up. "You cannot own a spring, Mr. Redfield. You can only stand between it and the thirsty. I have decided already which side of it I mean to stand on." Redfield went down the hill without another word, and he was smiling again by the time he reached his buggy, because he had a town council in his pocket, and a widower on a hill did not. By Wednesday, a notice hung on the post outside the feed store, under the council's seal, and men gathered at it as at any accident. It proposed an ordinance, the fair and equal distribution of all available water in the township for the duration of the emergency. Every man who read it understood, without the paper saying so, whose water was meant. Redfield did not say seize, he said share. From the feed store steps, he spoke of the selfishness of one man above a dying town, hoarding what the Lord had put in the ground for everyone, while children went to bed with cracked lips. He never mentioned that the water already ran free to anyone willing to climb for it. A frightened town does not check a kind-sounding lie against the facts. It feels its thirst and looks for someone to blame. That night, by the kerosene lamp, Josiah took a dented tin box down from the shelf above the hearth. Inside, folded in oilcloth, lay a single sheet of paper. He had bought the Cinder Ground for back taxes at a county sale seasons ago, when no other hand would rise for 15 acres of rust and hardpan, and the deed had come to him free and clear. No lien, no note, no bank with a claim to one stone of it. It was the one thing in the world wholly his. He read every line, though he knew it by heart, then laid it back in the box while Micah watched from his blanket. He was not so alone as the speeches made him sound. Ephraim Locke came up the next morning, settled on the fence rail, and read his Bible before he spoke. "A crowd's a strong thing, and a stupid one," he offered at last. "It'll trample a man on Thursday, and can't tell you Friday why." He would stand up at the meeting, and so would the Odell family and Widow Ansell, and a few others who had carried buckets down that hill. It did not look like enough. Redfield had the seal, the steps, and the fear of a whole town. Josiah had a boy, an old dowser, a few poor families, and a tin box on a shelf. But there was one thing in it the ordinance could not reach. They could rise in the meeting hall and vote to call his water everyone's. They could not vote it out from under his own 2 feet. The whole distance between those two things was a single sheet of paper, and Josiah Weller had read every last word of his. The council would sit on Thursday, and the town would be there to hear what a man they had laughed out of an auction yard would say when it was his turn. The meeting hall had not held that many bodies in years. Men stood along the walls. The benches were full. The windows open on a valley 2 months without a green field. At the front sat the 5 who ran the town's small affairs, and among them, hands folded, sat Cyrus Redfield. He rose slow. "Neighbors, we are past the season for pride. There is water on the high ground east of here. More than one man ought to hold while children go dry. I'm asking this council to declare it a common good and to appoint someone to see it shared out fair. I'd carry that burden myself, at cost. 2 dry months will teach a town to believe a man who talks of mercy." Josiah Weller sat near the back with Micah pressed to his side. He had not come to argue the law. The deed and the tin box on his knee would not warm one throat in that room. A man could win a paper fight and lose the town. When the chairman asked was there any word against the measure, Josiah stood. The room turned. Here was the selfish man they had been told about. He waited for the last shuffle to die. "Mr. Redfield's right about one thing," he said. "It's too much water for one family, so I won't keep it. There's nothing here to divide up fair, because there's nothing here for sale. The spring on the Cinder Ground is open to Calder Bluff, starting tonight. You don't need to own the spring. You need to be able to reach it. Anyone here who's thirsty, the gate's open. No money, no price. Come and drink." For a moment, nobody spoke. There was nothing left to distribute. Free water cannot be shared out more fairly than free. and every eye once aimed at the widower swung slowly to the man who had come to sell them their own salvation and wanted so badly to be its keeper. Rufus Barr rose from the end of the bench, a wide man whose word carried because he spent so few of them. "I move we strike the measure," Barr said. "There's no water in this county needs distributing that isn't already handed out free by the man we called a fool for buying it. I'll not vote to manage a gift." The chairman did not need a second. He got 4 of them. Redfield stood a moment in a room that had stopped belonging to him. No one shouted him down. That was the whole of it. Josiah did not point, did not spend a word to bury him. The kindness had done that cleaner than any accusation. Cyrus Redfield had reckoned money to the last penny, and never once reckoned a town. And he left the way water leaves a cracked pan, quickly and without being missed. They came the next morning, the way the story promised they would. The whole of Calder Bluff came up the Cinder Ground with empty buckets, up the same red slope they had watched a widower climb 4 months before, behind 80 animals they had laughed at. They came hats off. Some had done the laughing, and they set the buckets and the shame down together at the top and said his name. Josiah worked the line without a word wasted, showing where to dip so the sand would not stir, where to let the cold settle before the next family drew. Micah ran the length of it like it was his to run, telling grown farmers to mind the mud, the water cold enough to ache your teeth. The boy was 7, and the line did as he said. Naomi's tin dipper hung where it had always hung. Josiah filled it and put it in the first pair of waiting hands. An old woman drank and passed it to the man behind her, and it went down the line that way, hand to hand. Cold water in a dented cup that had once hung by an empty cistern with nothing to lift. It came back to him at day's end, still wet, and he hung it up again. In the shade of the one live oak lay what was left of the herd, a fat few, sold down by the fall, easy in the ground they had torn open with their own snouts. Nobody thanked the Hogs. They had started the whole of it and slept through the thanks. Josiah did not gloat. He had paid $25 for 80 animals nobody wanted, and they had bought him back a thing no auction ever sold, a place among people who now knew his name. He filled a bucket for a girl too small to reach, and did not look up to see who was watching. The seasons turned, and the spring turned with them, cold in August, and cold again in the frost. And Josiah taught his son what the ground had taught him. He showed Micah how to read a hog's ears before its mouth, how a herd drifts toward wet the way a needle drifts north, how the dead-looking clay tells the truth to anyone patient enough to wait for it. The boy learned it the way children learn a thing they will still be doing when they are old. Ephraim came up one evening with his Bible under his arm. He said the spring ought to have a name, and gave it one, and did not explain it. Rehoboth was all he said, and went home. Josiah looked it up later, after the boy was down. Room enough, that was all it meant. Micah was hanging the dipper on its nail at the spring's edge, where it stayed now for anyone, always full. "You said we couldn't own it, Papa," the boy said. "We can't," Josiah told him. "We just get to live over it, and keep the gate open." The dipper hung there in the last light, dripping, ready for the next thirsty hand up the ridge. Water was never meant to be kept, only carried. Worth, like water, runs underground until something patient roots it up. A man may hold the deed to the ground above a spring and still never own the spring. He can only choose to stand between it and the thirsty or turn away. The drought that was meant to finish Josiah Weller only proved what the Hogs had known before he did. Most of us are standing over some spring the world hasn't seen yet, a skill nobody asked for, a patience nobody rewarded, a bit of ground somebody laughed at. Josiah's ground taught him the one thing worth keeping. What you hold in the dark helps no one, and what you're willing to share can save a whole town. If you know someone the world wrote off too soon, too old, too poor, too alone, send them this story tonight. And if you'd like more stories about the people a town laughed at right up until it needed them, subscribe. That's the only kind we tell here.